So today I'm going to talk about an issue that is almost entirely anecdotal. For those who prefer hard and fast evidence over people's personal stories, this might not be the video for you, but it's an important subject nonetheless, and unfortunately the only way to address it is to bring in some of those stories from individuals who have suffered some sort of abuse or who have been wrongly punished for whatever reason. But the issue that I was going to discuss is elders and the potential abuse of their power. Like I said previously, most of the stories that I'm going to relay are anecdotal. They're people's personal stories, but they're important nonetheless. There are many people that I know personally who have experienced abuses of power, elders using their position in order to get things out of people or to threaten them into doing things that they didn't want to do. Whether that in some cases be some sort of sexual act, especially in cases of child molestation. There have been many young men and women who have said that their abuser threatened them with disfellowshipping if they told anyone, and they threatened to have their family cut them off if they tried to speak out. Another way that child molesters and abusers use their power as an elder in order to get what they want are in judicial cases where they are being accused of molestation, and they're using the process against the abused person, taking advantage of the fact that, as I've mentioned in previous videos, the organization has a two-witness rule where if there are not two witnesses to an alleged act, then the organization doesn't feel as though they have enough evidence to pursue any sort of judicial action. And because they oftentimes do not report cases of child molestation to police, unfortunately, a lot of times that means that abusers are able to use the system and use those, I don't want to say loopholes, and use those processes and procedures in order to get away with things. In some cases, elders have even threatened their victim and been able to use their position as an elder to orchestrate things in order to get someone disfellowshipped in order to silence them. I know at least two people who were molested by elders, and the elders orchestrated things in order to get them disfellowshipped. So, and then, mind you, once someone is disfellowshipped and they're cut off from the congregation, any accusations of molestation or any accusations of harm done by anyone in the congregation is going to be looked at with much more skepticism. It's already looked at with quite a bit of skepticism, and if someone is cast out, and especially if the elders can paint the situation to appear as though the person is simply a disgruntled apostate or simply trying to make the organization look bad, they can use that, use the organization's culture of fear and anger towards people who leave and speak out against a victim of abuse in order to silence them.
Another way we can contribute to the oneness, rejecting false stories that are designed to separate us from Jehovah's organization. As an example, Think about the apostate-driven lies and dishonesties that Jehovah's organization is permissive toward pedophiles. I mean, that is ridiculous, isn't it? If anybody takes action against someone who would threaten our young ones and takes action to protect our young ones, it's Jehovah's organization. We reject outright such lies.
But beyond just, that's a huge issue, but beyond sexual abuse and using their power in order to orchestrate things so that they can abuse people who are vulnerable or people who they have power over. Another aspect of abuse of power is simply elders using the disfellowshipping process and using that threat of disfellowshipping and that threat of estrangement in order to get people to do what they want. The organization as a whole does this. They use the threat of estrangement to keep people quiet about doctrines that they find out aren't true. They use it to keep people quiet about the mass cover-up of child sex abuse within the organization. They use it to silence people about from speaking about some of the abuses of power that I mentioned before, as far as elders using their position in order to threaten people to perform sexual acts or to threaten them to keep them silent. But elders, because they are in the position that they are and because the organization gives them that level of power, they are in the perfect position to threaten someone in order to get what they want. One example I can think of was that a friend of mine found out that one of the elders in his congregation was cheating on their spouse. And so that elder orchestrated things to get that person disfellowshipped. And they ultimately disfellowshipped them on false charges in order to get them out of the way and in order to silence them. And mind you, this person still tried telling people what happened, but the elders were able to play it off as though this person was just trying to get back at them for disfellowshipping him. In another case, one of my friends actually was threatened themselves with being disfellowshipped if they didn't admit to doing something that they had not done. And the elders in that situation were trying to cover up something that their children had done. And so in an effort to cover that up, they tried to find someone to pin this transgression on. And so they found a couple of people that they decided were going to be their scapegoat, and they threatened them with being disfellowshipped if they didn't admit to this particular thing. And some of them admitted to it even though they knew that they hadn't done it, and some of them refused to admit to this because they had not done anything. And ultimately they were disfellowshipped in order for those elders to cover up the transgressions of their children. In my case, I was threatened with being disfellowshipped for simply driving my girlfriend to the grocery store. And the elders in my congregation, even though they admitted that what I was doing wasn't against the society's direction, there was nothing in the Bible that made it wrong, they didn't like it, so they were going to potentially disfellowship me for it. So elders have, as I mentioned before, an extreme level of power. A question has to be asked by any Jehovah's Witness examining the situation. Do they use that power? Should they even have that power? Should be the real question. And beyond that, when they make a decision, say they decide to disfellowship someone, is there any level of certainty that that person is actually guilty of what they're being disfellowshipped for? As I said before, all I can offer is anecdotal evidence, but I know many people who were disfellowshipped for things that they did not do. For myself, that became a more important issue as I started examining some of the issues with the Jehovah's Witness, the history of Jehovah's Witnesses, and some of the teachings. That became a serious issue because the organization had always made it out as though not only were elders appointed by Holy Spirit, which when you look into that and realize that many elders were molesting children all the way up until the point where they were appointed as an elder and beyond that point. So there was a continuous practice of sexual abuse of children all the way up until they were appointed as an elder and after. You had that claim that these people are appointed by Holy Spirit starts to fall apart. And so the next claim, as far as the decisions that they make being directed by God, and that those who are disfellowshipped are actually being punished by God, and that is God himself who is doing the judgment, and he is the one who is ultimately disfellowshipping these people and not the elders. That claim that is made several times by the organization in their publications and in their videos. That claim needs to be examined because, as I said before, when you see countless cases of people who have been silenced because they're trying to come forward about abuse that they or others have suffered, you see elders threatening and actually going through with disfellowshipping people for petty, stupid things that when you look at all of these abuses of power and then try and square that with the claim that these men are appointed by Holy Spirit and that their decisions are coming directly from God and that it's not these men who are making the decisions, it's God. Those claims, as I said before, start to fall apart, and that you start to realize how ludicrous it is to try and claim that these men, the decisions that these men made or are making shouldn't be questioned, and that that members of the congregation should just go along with the decisions that they're making and the punishments that they're dealing out because they're supposedly appointed by God. The organization had a video. I'll play it now. But the organization had a video that they showed at a convention a couple of years back now, where I believe the guy's an elder or a ministerial servant. I guess I don't know what his position is in the congregation, but he finds out that one of his friends was unjustly disfellowshipped, that the elders were abusing their positions in order to disfellowship his friend, or that's what the story makes it out to seem as though.
No, you're disappointed. I'm sure the elders must have their reasons.
I'm sure they do.
What does that mean?
Nothing, just forget it, okay?
Carl? Why would the elders decide that about your case? It doesn't make any sense. Not that I'm surprised. Sure, I'll see you tomorrow and we'll sort this thing out together. Don't worry, I'll help you fix this. If I were an elder, I would never treat people like this. What were they thinking? Wait, what am I thinking? Absalom turned people away from the king, telling them he was more just, more understanding. If I take sides with Carl tomorrow, what could happen?
They don't even belong. They call themselves Christians and
Control
elders.
everybody.
Something wrong with the elders too.
They need to be out.
Really?
Always being judged.
Why would they do that?
They don't even belong. They call themselves Christians.
I don't know all the facts. And even if I did, it doesn't matter. I can't let my pride get in the way of my loyalty to Jehovah. Absalom could have avoided all those bad things if he only stayed content. I need to ask Jehovah's help to root out those bad things in my heart so I can stay content.
They try to play it off as though it's unreasonable for this person who finds out that his friend has been unjustly punished. They try and play it off as though it's haughty and arrogant and unreasonable for that individual to want to speak out and want to be there for his friend and support him in spite of what these elders were doing. And the organization tries to make it out as though this person simply needed to read the Watchtower magazines and realize that he might not know all the facts, and therefore he should go along with what's happening with these elders and just support the decision that they've made. Mind you, in this individual case, the organization obviously is trying to make it out as though this person realizes that they don't have all the facts and realizes how foolish it was to trust their friend. But that ignores all the myriad of cases where sometimes people do have all the facts. Sometimes they were with their friend when an alleged act happened and they know that it didn't happen. And yet the elders still are trying to punish them for something in order to either cover up something that they've done or cover up something that their children have done. So in those situations, if you watch the video with that in mind, realizing that that happens quite frequently and that there are situations where maybe you do have the facts, you know that your friend was innocent, and you know that these elders are simply trying to cover up things that they have done. When you watch it with that perspective, it really changes the overall message of the story. Because, mind you, Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to be Christians. That's the claim, at least. And yet the central story within the Christian Gospels, with the story of Jesus, is essentially a man who was wrongly sentenced to death because of corruption of religious leaders and because they were trying to silence him. And so when you look at it from that perspective, you realize that the whole narrative, the whole story of Jesus was that he was unjustly punished for something he didn't do. And so when you examine the society's claims that witnesses should just go along with whatever the elders are doing, that they shouldn't speak up if there's abuses of power, that they should just allow those who are in a position of authority to do whatever they want and to not hold them accountable. That flies directly in the face of everything that the Gospels seemed to try to convey. That's actually something that the organization has tried to hammer home with Jehovah's Witnesses for quite a while now. For the most part, they try to convey the message that that the decisions as far as disfellowshipping, that those are all directed by Holy Spirit, and that it's God himself who's making those decisions. But when they do tacitly acknowledge that there may be mistakes within that process, and that innocent people might be disfellowshipped, and elders might abuse their power. They really try and hammer home this idea that even in spite of that, witnesses should go along with what's happening, and they should support their elders, and they should support the decisions that their elders have made, and that ultimately God in the future is going to correct things. Jehovah's Witnesses love the phrase, wait on Jehovah. Essentially what that means is, yes, you may see some corruption. Yes, you may see abuses of power, but just ignore it, because everything will be taken care of in the future. Now, mind you, with the cases of child sex abuse, with the cover-up of certain actions committed by the organization in the past, with the discovery that certain doctrines were false and trying to silence people who speak out about that stuff. Many of those things have been going on for decades, in some cases more than half a century. So this idea that God's just going to step in at some point and stop these abuses of power, this idea is pretty outrageous, and it's pretty insulting to anyone who knows some of the issues and knows the history behind them and knows the lengths that the organization has gone to cover things up, and knows the lengths that individual elders have gone to in order to cover up their actions. It, as I said before, it is a ridiculous concept, and there's no way that you can look at the situation and come away from it believing that the right choice is to remain silent, and the right choice is to simply let elders continue to do what they're doing, unchecked and without any sort of oversight.
What's wrong with the elders too? They need to be out.
Always being judged.
Why would they do that? Why?
It's not even about
I wanted to just comment on this particular clip one more time, because I think it's very telling, and I think it highlights how fearful the organization is about members of the congregation holding elders accountable for their actions and holding the organization accountable for their actions. Because when you look at this situation, this is actually exactly what should happen when there's an abuse of power. The congregation should, together with one voice, come together and say, no, we're not going to accept this. We're not going to support these abuses, and we're going to stand firmly against someone using their power to harm someone else. And yet the organization makes this out as though this is something bad or this is something disunifying, whereas in reality, it should be, the congregation should, as I said, come together, unify together, and say that they're not going to stand for someone using their position in order to hurt someone else or in order to cover up something that they've done. So, as I said, it's very telling, and I think it really highlights the organization's fear of members of the congregation starting to stand up and starting to voice their disagreements with the process and with the system as a whole. So, the takeaways from this video, I hope, are, if you're a Jehovah's Witness, ask yourself, are elders actually appointed by Holy Spirit? And if they are, why are people who are molesting children being appointed as elders? Why are people who are cheating on their wives being appointed as elders? Why are people who have been committing atrocious acts behind the scenes, how are these people getting appointed by elders if God supposedly is the one doing these appointments and he knows everything? How are these people getting to these positions? The second question would be, are the decisions that the elders make directed by God? Is God actually the one making these decisions? Is he the one who is deciding that someone should be disfellowshipped? And if not, and if it's simply just a couple of guys getting together and making these decisions, and in some cases making these decisions in order to cover up things that they have done in the past, why go along with that process and why go along with that system if you know that there is corruption within it, and if you know that certain people are abusing the system in order to silence others? So hopefully that gives people some food for thought. It was just something that I was thinking about, and it was something that I figured I'd talk about just to get it out there. So yeah, I guess that's everything. Until next time.